Welcome back to the Owner Seat Podcast, the show where fitness and wellness operators, franchisors, and franchisees get the real playbook on what it takes to scale with clarity, not chaos. Today's episode is for every fitness and wellness owner who has looked at the landscape around them and felt it. The lines between fitness and healthcare are starting to blur, and the operators who recognize that shift first are going to be the ones who win the next decade. Because gyms are no longer just places to work out. Studios are no longer just places to take a class, and the consumer sitting across from your front desk, they don't just want to look better. They want to actually be healthier. They want to feel better, and they want someone they trust to show them how. That's the gap my guest today has spent his entire career closing. Andrew Marlow is the president of Lindora, one of my favorite brands that I've been following for some time, a 55-year legacy brand being transformed from medically guided weight loss into something the industry has not quite seen before, a modern metabolic health platform built around a muscle-first philosophy, 6 evidence-based pillars, and a franchise model designed to make metabolic health accessible in communities across the nation. Andrew didn't arrive here without the battle scars. Check out this resume. He was a general manager and regional director at Equinox, was one of the first strategic hires at Pure Barre, with a successful brand as well, and served as a senior vice president of operations at Xponential Fitness, helping redesign the corporate operating model across, listen to these brands, Club Pilates, StretchLab, YogaSix, and other category-defining brands after the company scaled from 50 to over 3,000 locations in just 5 years. For fitness franchisors, franchisees, and studio owners who want to understand where this industry is going and what it takes to build a brand living at the intersection of fitness and healthcare, this is what you want to listen to. Andrew, so excited. Welcome to the Owner Seat Podcast, sir.
Albar, what an incredible introduction.
You're killing it.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's incredible. But when you mentioned there in your intro, people are looking for this sort of full wall experience to go a little bit deeper. And also people are willing to pay good money for it.
Exactly.
So that's the thing. So anyway, excited to be here.
So excited that you're here. You've built and you've scaled fitness brands. I mean, big names. I know Equinox very well, having worked at Lifetime, right? That's a great brand that we kept our eye on. And then knowing many people, being from Southern California, I know HQ out in Irvine, but knowing people in the Pure Barre landscape, such an amazing brand. And then obviously the big consolidator that everyone's trying to compete with, Xponential Fitness, on the public market, doing extremely well. What did operating those businesses teach you the most as you're entering this metabolic health space? And what are people still not understanding in this space?
So I think on the metabolic side, I think there's a couple things that I learned in particular, actually over at Equinox, is people are wanting to know who's behind, what is the programming and who's behind it.
Right.
So I think that's one thing just out of the gates. And then everything focused around the experience itself. So for me in the metabolic space, now entering into it and kind of looking at the medical side, one of the first questions I asked myself going into that was like, what is the experience we're trying to create?
Mm-hmm.
What is the program that informs that experience and who's behind it? And how do we communicate that? So I did quite a lot of shopping around different competitors and asked a lot of frontline employees that question, like, what is this brand?
Mm.
That the explanations were very confusing, chaotic. And so I just found that as pretty striking, because I know that those answers were pretty clear when you walked into an Equinox. And the same thing over on the fitness side at Pure Barre. I think one of the things that separates a little bit of the fitness from the medical side is in the four-wall experience of a fitness studio. Once you do your first rep of a movement, you get this instant feeling from it. You know, your endorphins are going. But
Mm-hmm.
on the medical side, there's not necessarily as much of that experience. You might be sitting down in a red light bed and being like, what am I meant to be kind of experience? I'm being told something's happening, but I'm not experiencing it. And when you have that complexity of all the medical on top, you're like, okay, like I guess it's doing something. So as I was looking, I think that's something anyone in the fitness space coming into the medical can be looking at those businesses and kind of being like, okay, what is our programming and what is the experience we're trying to create? And then what is that experience on the first visit? And so that would be sort of the first lens I would kind of look at this in is, what are we asking our consumers to do? And
Interesting. I
how do
love
our
that.
staff communicate that?
Yeah, that's interesting because I do want to pull this back from as we're going into the layers of this from the member consumer experience, but also
Mm,
the operator and owners that are listening here, knowing and even asking, what should I do next? Because the stats just came out. It's what 80 to 90% of
mhm,
Americans, at least Americans, are metabolically unhealthy. So there's clear demand. There's an issue here, right? And I think
mhm,
Lindora's pioneering the way here to make people far more healthy, right? And a healthier life and
mhm.
lifestyle. But for those operators listening, we'll start there first as they listen to those stats and they know, okay, the demand's out there, the share of wallet is out there. People are spending the money outside of my four walls. I'm not capturing it. What should they be building right now? Why aren't they? Is it the capital infrastructure? Is it you bring up medical, right? And when I think medical, I think the EHR and all of the different compliance things that you need to
Mhm.
have at medical doc or MP or what have you, the supply chain and the cost of goods sold there. Is it the education, the square foot? Like what are you seeing out there? And why is Lindora figuring it out?
Yeah, so I think just thinking of the stats from a consumer perspective, I think is always best, and it can
Mm,
inform where we invest capital
right.
and all those good things. But I think actually the one stat that really stood out to me is that more than 50% of the United States is either obese or overweight.
Mm,
Which is pretty striking. And then when we talk about not being medically or metabolically unhealthy, I think we just need to define what that actually means. So it means that folks are tired all the time. They don't sleep particularly well. They're
right.
carrying weight around their waistline, and it doesn't move no matter how much they're trying. The blood sugar creeping up, the energy
Mm,
crashes after meal, hormones off, they're feeling inflamed. And so I think that's like the daily experience of how someone could know that they're not metabolically healthy. Um, and so clearly what we're doing isn't working, I
right.
think, just as a society.
Yeah.
So, or we're not pulling enough people along the ride is the first thing that I would kind of think about this. So when we think about metabolic health, it's not necessarily that people look sick, but they're just not well, and it's metabolic dysfunction. And so I think that's the default state. So I think that presents a big opportunity to, of course, turn that around. So for
Right.
like, let's say an old school fitness model, some people might come there to lose weight, and look better for summer, but I think that's solving the wrong problem for the wrong person, and I think that's not where the opportunity is. That moment has gone. I do think also weight loss is gone
Yeah.
as well. I don't think that's what people want. That's out the door, and can talk about that here later on. But I think the person walking into, if you're on the wellness side or if it's a fitness studio, they're not just trying to fit into the jeans. They're trying to understand how their body works on a cellular level and how the brand actually connects to that and how it connects with their daily life. So they're trying to get their body working again,
Right.
basically. So their metabolism is broken, their muscle mass is low. We like to call it they're under muscled. Lots of people out there. And so I don't think a lot of folks have necessarily a fitness problem. It's the under muscle issue. And I think that's sort of like the opportunity for folks is being able to adjust some of their programming to kind of connect with some of that messaging. And so if you can connect to the metabolic story, which is 90% of the population, you can expand your total addressable market on who you're talking to.
Well, the addressable market's massive and even more so. And I'm curious because I love the Lindora motto around muscle first, everything else follows. I'm like, no one else is saying that. Yet we know there's an issue, and I want to bring up GLPs. I'm really curious about
Mhm.
uh, or your what you think about it. And is that what led to that motto being so prevalent now? Because you
Well,
start to see, is it because people are using that for this whole weight loss? But we know that's not necessarily the whole picture. It's, to your point, the underlying muscle, the lean muscle. And I love that there's so much more data coming out and conversation around the mitochondria, which that's a whole different topic. But can you walk us through that motto and why Lindora is about muscle first? And you said it, it's not just about weight loss first. And that was just so, that's years ago. And being in the fitness space for wellness space for 16 years now, that's all I heard, right? We did weight loss programs. There's always something popping up about weight loss, but there never was this muscle first message out there. What do you think?
yeah, so I think the muscle first comes from actually what happens when you don't focus on the muscle,
Hmm.
right? So I think, and this has been part of my discovery jumping into Lindora and really understanding what members were doing before getting to Lindora and what that approach was. And so after speaking to them, for decades and decades, in particular for women, they've been told to focus on the scale, right? And I think folks are looking for three things. They're always trying to figure out, how do I build muscle, but how do I lose fat, but do it with high energy, safely and sustainably. But I think when people don't know how to do that and they don't have the science, they just default to, how do I get smaller? And the measurement of success is on the scale.
Right.
And so what ends up happening is, of course, it's calorie restriction. And then the calorie restriction loads leads to something not sustainable in the long term. So it turns into this rebound and redo. And it's exhausting for so many people out there, in particular, jumping into Lindora and having conversations with the members about, what were you going through before you got here? And it was just this
Mhm.
rebound and redo, rebound and redo. So it was this thought process of like, how do I let me focus on the outside first. I'll deal with the inside later. But as you know, if you focus, there is no focusing on the inside later. Like, some of that damage is done along the way, in
Right.
particular, losing muscle. And so over time, I think this rebound and redo results in, it's not sustainable, and they're losing muscle along the way. And we'll talk about muscle here in a second and its importance.
Mm.
And so I think for a lot of folks, it's exhausting. That's number one. And it's not sustainable, and been doing it for
Discouraging.
decades. Yeah. I think also what's been interesting in speaking with some of the Lindora members as they got on a better pathway, and I'll talk about that pathway here, but there's also this sense of, is there a better way for their kids? Which I actually found very interesting, this rebound and redo of calorie restriction and focusing on what's the pounds I'm losing on the scale, and that's success. And so it's sort of like, how do they shift philosophically from what their is versus what their body's made of, right? And so that has been very interesting speaking to them. This muscle first approach has come where, what's kind of different at Lindora is, we use the in body and other couple tools to really
Nice.
look at on a weekly basis, like, am I gaining muscle? What is my fat loss actually looking like when I'm using things like GLP and things like that? And when we actually focus on muscle, there's different behaviors form. Like, the behaviors for fat loss actually follow naturally. If I'm looking at the weight and I'm like, I need to gain more muscle or not lose it while I'm trying to lose weight, different behaviors happen. Resistance training happens. Um, People begin to walk more. They begin to eat more protein, which keeps them naturally satiated, of course, right? They're feeling fuller. And sort of like those foundational behaviors that are needed start to happen once someone shifts to, well, how much muscle do I have? And is it growing
Right.
as I'm on a weight loss journey? So it sort of transcends it. And so there's just so many cool things about muscle. One of the kind of inspirational people we brought on board is JJ Virgin, which I'll talk about, kind of later on here.
Yeah.
But, you know, I would view muscle as like a sugar sponge. To kind of put it simply, it's the primary place where your body's going to store carbohydrates as energy. So the more muscle you have, the more storage tanks you have, of course.
Mhm.
So sugar goes into the muscle instead of spilling over fat. So I think the more muscle we have, the more capacity we have to absorb energy and not store it in the wrong places.
Right.
And so I think that's one. The other is just over the years, I've always done a lot of weight training, but then coming into the medical side, it's been pretty spectacular to learn just the power of muscle from
Mhm.
it's like a little pharmacy. You know, it's every time you contract your muscle and you activate it fully, it's almost like medicine in the bloodstream. So, I mean, all this has been relatively new to me. I've known it in the past, and now it's been really interesting bringing to the fold. But it signals myokines, which are little signals that will help lower blood sugar, mobilize fat, and crush inflammation every time you
Right.
like get peak contraction. So, and it can also literally grow your brain. So there's just so many fascinating things about muscle. And I think the goal is like muscle's always been sexy, right? On an aesthetic side, but now
Sure.
bringing it into the fold into a cellular level. And I think that's how you can, if you're an operator out there, you can attract people into whatever you're operating by really honing in on muscle because there's already momentum that way, but we're going even deeper and narrower into that topic. Um, and then muscle is also just a longevity anchor. It's just one big predictor of how long you'll live, and it's not your weight, right? Your weight's not going to be predictor of how long you're going to live, right? It's your muscle mass and your strength. So I think if a franchise owner says to anybody like weight loss is the goal, it really shouldn't be. It should be muscle is the goal, and how often am I activating it? Because weight loss is going to happen as a byproduct of it, and it's
Right.
not making it an exhausting process. It's really making it really enjoyable for consumers. That's why we say muscle first and everything follows. It's those behaviors for weight loss, which people we know are searching for online. We say, well, if you focus there, right, you're actually going to get what you want, but we're actually going to do it all and better, right? So we
Right.
got to think bigger picture, and that's how I view our role as a brand is to really start that conversation with
So
folks
good.
and set them up for success.
Love that you all are having the conversation and doing something about it. And it does require, to your point, it was great advice to those listening, right? It does require you doing your homework, right? There's an education aspect to this.
Mhm.
And you had an opportunity, Andrew, to go through that yourself, even being in the industry for so long, and I love
Mhm.
that, and that excites me too. But for the owners listening, the education, the research, and there's plenty out there, right? You think of, well, Andrew, you, Lindora, Dr. Lee at Lindora, right, and the team there, as well as, I mean, I know people know some of these names like Huberman and Atia, and
Mhm.
we're all talking about the same things. Is muscle, and you brought up muscle to longevity. I mean, that's huge, but I love that you brought up the hormonal aspect, the mental health aspect too, not just the aesthetic piece. One of the differentiators at Lindora, as you think about scaling this and replicating this, and it's very difficult to do what you all do, you've
Mhm.
developed this 6 pillar metabolic health model. Can you walk us through what that is? And there's a reason why when I talk to people that experience Lindora, they're coming back and they know these 6 pillars really well. You all do a great job educating. Can you walk us through this?
Yeah. So I think I think the way to think about it is where we created the six pillars was actually based on how confusing the market is.
Mm,
So if I go online right now and I just search, blood tests, right? My feed just gets inundated with all these different biomarkers. There's 50, there's 100, there's
mhm,
75. They all, seem to be this sort of silver bullet. And then when it comes to the services as well, when I'm looking to, let's say, get vitality or lose weight and I'm searching for those things online, I'm going to get inundated with services. So
mm,
I'm going to get NAD coming through. I can take it as an injectable. I can take it as IV. There are various different price points. I'm going to get hit up with a lot of IV therapies, right? I'm going to get hit up with GLP. I'm going to get hit up with hormone therapy. There's all these services and interventions coming my way, but I really don't know as a consumer how to think about which one I prioritize over another.
mm.
And so it's sort of like from a consumer, it's like, where do I start? I can't do them all at the one time because I don't think that would be safe, nor do I have the money. Right. And so when we were looking at all of our services that we offered at Lindora and then also where we wanted to go, it was like, okay, how are we anchoring these services into a framework that helps consumers start thinking about, ultimately, at the end of the day, what people are actually wanting is vitality. They want a lived experience, right? They want to wake up alert. They want to not have brain fog, all those good things.
Mhm.
But the actual pathway to getting that is through metabolic health. So it's the physiological side. So we looked at, okay, we identified that there was 6 pillars that kind of make up a healthy, make your metabolism healthy. And there was, muscles as being one component of that,
Right.
hormones being the second pillar, hydration and nutrients being another, energy being another, metabolism being another, and
Mhm.
then gut health being another. And so our vision was like, okay, you've got these 6 pillars that kind of make up your metabolic health. And how do we know they're healthy or not? And one of the ways we can do that is through lab work. So we curated and made new labs that kind of looked at how do I know that each of these pillars are healthy through my blood work combined with body composition as well as combined with grip strength. So we kind of pulled these
I
kind of
love it.
things together. And there's other things kind of coming the way soon as well. Other factors like sit to standing, like how often can someone do that in 60 seconds, and kind of building protocols on this to establish baselines and ways to improve. But these 6 pillars allow us to tie in particular services into them. So one of the cool things is at Lindora is when you become a member, one of the first things you do, of course, you do your lab work and you actually sit down with a provider for 45 minutes. And in that provider conversation, you actually get a curated slide deck that has your biomarkers on there, as well as your body composition stats. Go through each of their pillars and how they correspond to a marker and if we know that it needs support or it's already pretty healthy. And that allows us to make some recommendations for services. So, for example, on the muscle health side, if we look at, let's say, somebody's in body and we're seeing their ratios are a little bit off on
Mhm.
body fat to lean tissue, we can prescribe, of course, EMS resistance training. And for that to happen, let's say 2 times per week in order to make ourselves a little bit healthier on that pillar because that's the one that needs support. The cool thing is this process happens every 90 days where you do your labs and you sit down with your provider. I think also a relationship that is missing out there in the traditional,
Right.
the traditional medical space with their doctor. But we really aim to one of the things we saw was like when we release new services, that every 90 days, someone can sit with a provider and know if it's going to be the right fit for them or not.
Wow.
So we also don't want everybody doing everything. It's not the right fit necessarily. So we want to identify what pillar needs support. And I think our goal is that's the way that we can kind of make sense of this confusing space for folks is every 90 days, they get more educated on what services are bringing the fold or how their pillar has been supported. So then when time comes when all these new services come and their Instagram feed gets blown up with it, they actually think, which pillar needs support here? And we create like a really empowered, educated member base kind of throughout this
Love it.
process.
What an amazing journey. I love that. And thank you for walking us through that, including the 6 pillars. It makes sense. And it's so interesting, and you're right. I mean, it's not only confusing and a frustrating ecosystem out there, so fragmented, but it's overwhelming. And what it
Hmm.
sounds like that Lindora's solving for, it's all under one roof, right? You've built this infrastructure, which it sounds like you're also gathering a lot of data as well to continue to make
Hmm.
it better and better. And I'm looking forward to what you all release. I wanna switch gears a little bit for the audience here to learn more about you, Andrew, because at the top of it, I did bring up a lot of impressive brands and you've been part of a lot of growth stories. And there's a lot of franchisors and franchisees that I help or that listen to this show. And they're getting ready for or wanting to grow their portfolio size. Maybe they're at 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, but as you get past that, it starts to get harder and harder. I mean, you've gone from 50 to 3,000, as that I mentioned earlier. During these growth stages, what breaks first? What are some of the things that you can advise or recommend to the audience that they just need to keep their eye on when you think of growth being faster than their existing infrastructure? And then just to
Hmm.
tie it in with Lindora, I mean, you all are having some rapid growth. How are you protecting against that?
Yeah. So I think a couple things, and for my franchisors out there, but then also you're going to have the franchisee experience of this. But
Right.
I think a couple things don't actually, um, how do I put this here? What actually is going to break first isn't operations. I think it becomes trust with the franchisor.
Mm,
And so I think you can patch a broken process, right? There's ways to do that, but then you've got the execution alongside with those processes, right? And so I can't I think you can't easily patch a franchisee who stopped believing and a franchisor that maybe has their back. So I
mm,
think that's like one thing as a franchisor, it's really important, like that trust and clear communication on what's happening, why we're doing things, allowing feedback mechanisms for the franchisee as well to kind of voice their opinions for initiative rollouts, and always using data to, of course, guide decisions and kind of being very transparent on those. And so I think what happens is scale is a system can grow faster than the support structure. And so in the first year and around onboarding, of course, the franchisee gets a lot of attention because they're just opening their store and all that good stuff. And I think one of the biggest misses is once the store is operating, as you know, they're going to face different challenges during growth that they never faced
right.
during the initial opening. So that requires performance coaching, right?
Mm,
And to kind of help throughout that process. And I think it's really important as well that the trust can also be rooted in a great P&L, right? And so I think
so
through
true.
I think that's just the reality of things. And so if a franchisor can get access to the P&L and L and build trust kind of out of the gates, they understand like how the business is growing and how the initiatives are designed to help lower operating expenses. Or, I saw it time and time again with some stores where they started to add a little bit too much payroll before like their utilization rates actually hit
Right.
particular areas, where they just didn't do the basics of like swapping formats that were less popular for others, or
Yeah.
having hard coaching conversations with an instructor that maybe they have a great personal relationship with, but the utilization rates aren't there. And you got to make a decision. Do you back and train them and allocate more resource towards those training procedures? Or do you, reduce their schedules and swap them with someone who's a little bit more popular? And so I would see that sort of time and time again. So I think the trust is built, and everyone has their own reasons on why they're opening and what they're going to do with the money when they're really successful, but the P&L really is the reality there. And over a 10-year franchise agreement, the competitive landscape changes
It
so
does.
so much. And so you've got to see how the P&L is responding to those things as well. Like GLPs weren't around 5 years ago, right? They weren't around rampant that they are 3 years ago. So like, does that have an impact on consumers, right? Have an impact on utilization rates and informing how you're kind of operating. So I think that's one thing. Like a franchisor can't probably make some of the best decisions if they don't have that P&L and know the lived experience of a franchisee. I
Mm,
think that has to be out of the gates. I think the second thing that ends up breaking is probably going to be the relevance of the brand as well. I would see that sort of, you would see some brands when they launch, they have an initial demand point, and then the product's not innovated on top of, potentially because you don't have the infrastructure for product innovation. Let's say a fitness scientific board or something like that that informs programming. and has their finger on the pulse of what's going to be relevant, right? And what consumers are wanting. So I think that's going to be a thing that's going to break is the relevancy. And then also, if the market is changing and you're not changing your training curriculum to meet market demands as well, the training you maybe delivered 12 months ago is not relevant anymore.
Yeah.
And your teams are operating off of best practices that maybe aren't the best right now. So I think how we're getting ahead of some of these things is one of the great things about the acquisition from Next Health is if you look at their brand and how they kind of really pioneered in leaning the longevity space is they have a scientific advisory council,
Yeah.
right? So you have medical experts, all the household names, you've got exercise scientists, longevity researchers. And so I think it's their job where they're sitting on the edge of what's coming in. And then also what's a fad that's it's actually not going to build, good, reinforce the unit economics,
Right.
right? So they can at least be that filter mechanism that allows us, if we have that layer, allows us to pull in the franchisee into the relevancy before the market actually gets there, so they can always stay ahead of the demand curves.
Sure.
So I think that's another thing that breaks if your infrastructure was just really focused on onboarding and as the brand is today, and you're not investing on where it's going tomorrow and keeping a finger on the pulse of consumers as well. These are all things that can break. And again, you see it in the P&L, right? At the
Yeah.
end of the day. So I think that we are forming right now our own scientific advisory board and also bring in the best in class in metabolic health. One partner of that being JJ Virgin, of course.
Yeah.
But
Excited about the announcement. Super impressive.
yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, these are the things, and I think as a franchisee, when you know your franchisor has your back by looking at the P&L, but then also staying on top of the finger of the pulse of what's happening out there in the market, they can really trust, these initiatives are coming through because it's rooted off of consumer insight. It's vetted from people that this is all they do for their living is stay on the edge of these things and are having these conversations. So I think that's what's going to make our franchise stand out against the rest as well.
I'm just curious, and that was so good, and so many. I'm sure there's a ton listening here or watching that are just head nodding because whether it's the trust with franchisor or the brand relevance and right positioning yourself for the future, or the one that I wanna focus on. We'll come back because I do want to talk about JJ because that's a huge unlock for Lindora. I know you were super
Hmm.
excited and proud. I read all of the different articles and everything that you've stated, and what an impressive background because that is something that a lot of the other brands are not doing when you think about metabolic health. We're going to be hearing that far more. But
Hmm.
before I go there, one of the areas that I spend a lot of time in, but I'm curious on your thoughts as to the why. I spend a lot of time with franchisees around that P&L, that financial literacy piece.
Hmm.
And I've noticed this throughout my 16, 17 years in the space that there was just something lacking there, whether it was in corporate America or in this franchise model. And I'm still, as I'm doing this and I do this for a living, Andrew, I'm still trying to figure out, is it the vetting process from the franchisor, meaning they're
Hmm.
not vetting for the business acumen. So it
Hmm.
then leads to future issues, as you're mentioning some of the decisions around the unit economics and just not making great decisions because there's this lack of financial awareness. Or is it something else? Is the landscape changing too fast and people are just not up to speed with the financial literacy? I mean, what do you think it is that's leading to this P&L disconnect?
I think it's one, it's who you're bringing into the fold,
Hmm.
right? I think it's absolutely on the franchisor, right? If they're trying to build an incredible system of great operators, I don't see how you can be a great operator without knowing your P&L and L and knowing the
Right.
purpose of it. So if you have that, that's just culturally not been brought into the fold. I would kind of view it as a parallel as like when someone hires someone without the wrong skill set, it's obviously not the person that was hired, it's the employer. I think
Hmm.
that's the best way to look at it because there's at least
Sure.
something you can do about it. So I think it's expectations of bringing into the fold. It could be a combination of the composition of the corporate team and do they know how to read a P&L, right? Like,
Well,
is there vigorous training on P&L management? Can your creative person understand a P&L, right? Is everyone thinking about things through the lens of the P&L, right? And so I think it's a cultural thing. And there's more tools now than ever,
right,
right? You got great tools out there that can capture this stuff pretty seamlessly. It's just provided as part of the onboarding process, and
right.
it's an investment from the franchisor to be like, hey, this gets uploaded every month. You got great tools like Profit Keeper and things like that that can be used. So I don't think there's really an excuse to not do that, but I think it's the onboarding, it's the expectation, it's the discovery. And if they're not the right fit, right, they're not the right fit, right? But I
Sure.
think it needs to be part of the culture. Yeah.
I love it. Well, let's switch gears. Let's talk about JJ. Give me your thoughts. I mean, Chief Metabolic Health Officer. What does this partnership unlock for Lindora? And just
hmm
give me the ins and outs of this signaling. I mean, this is big news.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. So I'll kind of let you know how this all came to be. So
Yeah.
when I walked into Lindora, I was trying to figure out what is the anchor of the brand,
Mm,
right? So in the past, it was, and it's still a large part of what we do, especially in Southern California, but it was this nutrition program. It's kind of old school menu planning, and
mm,
people come in 3, 4, 5 times a week, and it's a lot of accountability and support. And people are looking at their body comp every day, giving advice on what to eat to hit their protein goals, their fiber goals, all that good stuff.
right.
But as I came on board, knowing muscle was so important to combat some of the side effects of GLP-1. As you know, people are just like, give me my GLP, and I'm going to do it. I'm not really going to eat my protein. I'm not going to, I'm going to say I'm going to do it. And then I'm also going to do my resistance training and all that good stuff, which everyone knows should happen with the GLP, but largely doesn't. You can see it in the stats there. The rebound redos, up to 40% muscle gone, weight back on, 12 months later, so on and so forth. So it was really interesting. When I came on board, I found there was this clinical trial that was done at Lindora in late 2023, beginning of 2024, and it was this sort of like muscle first approach, and it involved taking Lindora members and actually moving them through different protocols. One of them was doing EMS resistance training
Oh yeah.
combined with GLP-1, combined with the Lindora signature nutritional program. And so folks taking that, doing that stack, like all three, compared to the other groups, they increased muscle mass, they lost double the amount of body fat, they lowered their blood pressure pretty significantly and increased strength, all on a calorie deficit by doing this protocol. So I was like, oh, wow, there's a credible recipe for success here. And now this trial was done in conjunction with the Mayo Clinic and Google.
Mm,
So this is getting kind of published here pretty soon. And so anyway, I had this idea of like this muscle first approach. And anyway, we were talking about who would be a great brand ambassador for Lindora, especially if we know we need to go into metabolic health because we can catch people earlier in the journey. So, myself, Dr. Shaw,
that's right.
alongside with
Dr.
some other
Shah, yeah.
leaders, we were like, who's our person that would really connect with Lindora? We're like, well, who's been talking about metabolic health for 40 years,
Amazing.
right? That would be an incredible role model for a lot of our Lindora members. And then the members that don't know they're members yet, but they will. And like, who's going to be that great role model? And JJ, just before even meeting her, going through her content, just like, oh my gosh, like listen to this muscle first, right? Keeping things simple for people, right? It's all about behavior change. And so sat down with her and we really talked about, she had just such passion for building muscle and getting people the tools that they actually need and just cutting through a lot of the chaos and making it simple for folks. So it really personally connected with me, like her message.
Yeah.
And I knew it'd just be an incredible fit um, for the members. And so one of the things we looked at as well is we needed to really reimagine our product lines as well. And so JJ's brought her product lines into the clinics as well,
Excellent.
Reignite Wellness, to really kind of support this muscle first approach. But, we went through a process of like, what could this partnership look like, And so I think it's always important as a franchisor to also bring franchisees along with the ride. And so they got to meet her beforehand
So
and be
good.
like, what do you think? She came to speak at our convention in Los Angeles and everyone loved her, had wanted everybody to weigh in. And it was like, hey, as we build up the scientific advisory board, and, I was explaining to everybody how important it is for quality programming to lead the way, but also consumers want to know who's behind programming as well. And are they an authoritative figure? And so anyway, we kind of worked, what could this look like? And so we always had this dream, like we would love to make someone a chief metabolic health officer. And we couldn't find anyone that we couldn't be more a perfect fit than
Right.
like JJ,
Amazing.
And so anyway, so she's helping us right now as we look at a lot of our programming, right? How does this really fall in line with this muscle first approach? And I think one of the things we're trying to be very mindful of, people want to follow programs and protocols, right? And they want to know, like, if I sign up, what am I doing for the next 12 weeks,
Hmm.
90 days? And what outcomes can I anticipate? And so we're trying to be very thoughtful on, what does that look like? And so what we're trying to do with our members is like, let's lay a strong foundation, which is rooted in resistance training. So we have our first EMS resistance training protocols going on in our Newport clinic. It will be rolling out at all clinics here very soon. And then also
That's
paired
exciting.
with the nutrition side, which will lay a really strong foundation for folks to basically use their interventions on top of this strong foundation. So philosophically, where she and the rest of the Lindora team came on board was like, our goal for folks is to get them metabolic independence, meaning they're not dependent on the interventions. We should be the best at like getting people off of them and
Absolutely.
allowing their bodies to function appropriately as God intended, right? And we're going to use the intentions, the interventions on top of a strong foundation with the right structure. So she's working with us very, very closely here on that. And we couldn't be more thrilled to have her. Just philosophically, usually when you're thinking of partnerships, you've got their name or their brain, right? And we got both,
Yeah,
right?
both. Love it.
So yeah, so I think that was a massive win.
It's awesome. Big win. Great job, JJ, and looking forward to all the work you all do together. Well, I got a couple more questions for you, Andrew. I mean, you think about Lindora when it originated and getting into private equity, then being in the public market with Xponential, and now with this amazing platform and group, Next Health. How has that story been? I mean, for those listening, many haven't experienced private equity. Many haven't gotten into the public market, in the stock market and all of that. What has that experience been like for you now with this amazing brand and group at Next Health? Can you walk us through just like the differences? And then, I mean, just here in February, things are off to the races, right? Who is the Lindora franchisee for those that are listening, and this will be shared? I mean, who needs to be hearing this, and who are you all looking for?
Yeah, so let's unpack some of that. So I think like, who are we looking for? I think at the end of the day, aside from the basics of our P&L, right? Having that background and that maturity of stepping into understanding, what it takes to operate a business. Ideally, what we're looking for is folks that have experience of operating a successful business. That's number one. Two, that they need to be hands-on. It is not one of those things where you just want to set it and forget it, have someone else manage it, because we have the medical side of that as well. So there's big
Right.
implications on the organization. I think one of the things we take very seriously is, of course, just the integrity of the care we're providing to our patients. And so that takes a mature, responsible head to be leading the charge in their local market on this mission of metabolic health. And so it's one of those for me, one of the first questions I like to ask is, what does your typical day to how do you envision your day looking
Mm,
if you were to have a Lindora tomorrow?
yeah.
So I get a sense of how they currently structure their day, how they
How
how
involved
they
they want to be.
prioritize,
Yeah.
yeah, and how involved they kind of want to be in that. And of course, having it's not required, but understanding medical coming into the fold as
Mm,
well is going to speed up the learning curve on those things. So, and then also when we look at bringing folks into the fold, we want folks that believe in the mission. We keep saying here in internally, and you see it some in the marketing there, that we make people the one, meaning the 1 out of 10 that are actually metabolically healthy. And I think just being mission driven to do that is going to
mm,
be pretty important as well. So
great.
um, so on the private versus kind of the public side, I think there's benefits of both, and things that aren't great about both. So I think just it's been refreshing on the private side where depending on, if you want to eventually go for a big sale or you want to take it public, whatever that is, you don't have all the regulation there. You can do a lot more piloting, and there's just a lot more things that, the reins are put up as you're trying to get things in the right direction. And then also, I think at the beginning stages as well, you start to really attract really passionate, smart people into the fold that want to kind of get into the early side of things on the PE side. So, but on the public side, I one of the things I did really enjoy about that was always making sure that every quarter, yes, we're of course impacting our franchisees and making sure that they're profitable, but you could see that kind of big public scoreboard as well.
Right.
And that was really enjoyable of like hitting those targets. So yeah.
Amazing. Well, I really appreciate your time. Metabolic health. I mean, this is what we should be talking about. Our consumers not only are chatting about it, but are needing the support. And I think Lindora has created this this differentiator and the blueprint of what many in the audience are trying to replicate and knowing that they need to offer, right? They need to offer more value. And so you all are doing it, Andrew. Great job. Great job to you and the team. Big shout outs. For those that want to learn more about Lindora, how to become a potential franchisee, or just even connect with you, what is the best way to do that?
Yeah. So they can go to my LinkedIn at Andrew Marlow, and would probably be the best way to do that, or shoot me a note, shoot me an email, Andrew. So it'd be a Marlow at Lindora.com.
Excellent. I love it. And
And
we chatted a lot about, oh, go ahead.
yeah, I wanted to say, when I think about the vision of Lindora and how we can make metabolic health accessible, I think this is really the vision. The
Mm,
vision is we want to start with something familiar, with the familiarity of resistance training, because most folks have done that, right? They're
right.
familiar with how to do a squat or a push. So most folk have exposure to that. And so when we think about the brand moving forward, that being an entry point, and then when you're adding this EMS component to it, it allows for a really efficient workout. So that's like number one, it allows muscles to be fully activated and release those myokines that we were kind of
Right.
talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And so that can be sort of like the anchor and the gateway for folks to actually engage with their cellular health.
Mm,
So the great thing about the EMS being sort of this anchor, it's
yeah.
been pretty spectacular
Yeah.
seeing
Yeah.
members pairing in IV and NAD to the protocol. So they'd be like, well, how do I get the most out of my EMS session? How does NAD fit in? How does IV fit in? And so now it can kind of begin that conversation with folks on the cellular health through that familiar entry point. So I think what we're creating is like this juxtaposition between fitness and cellular health. And that's how we can kind of pull people sort of like along the ride and get them involved into these these really incredible interventions that we can track with their lab work and, of course, their body composition over time. So stay tuned on that side.
Andrew, and I'm so glad you ended on that because for those that aren't paying attention to that, it's all coming down to that. I mean, the science has improved tremendously and it's all
Mhm.
layering into cellular health, your mitochondria. There's going to be more. I love that you all are focusing on that. Clearly, you have positioned this brand to be ahead of the curve. So, very, very excited about that. And we talked a lot about the P&L today too. And I do want to, as I always mention, for anyone listening new to the show, fitness, wellness operators, franchisors, franchisees, if you're looking for clarity around cash flow, unit economics, pricing models, or wanting to improve that financial back office, your infrastructure, right, as you're looking to expand and maybe even multi-unit growth, definitely reach out to me at strategointel.com. Andrew, such a pleasure. This has been another episode of the Owner Seat Podcast. I'm your host, Albert Ramos. And as I always mention, new episodes drop every Monday and Friday at 8 a.m. Central. Andrew, thank you so much. Such a pleasure. Great job. Keep it up.
Cheers, Albert.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.